In the fractured memory of a forgotten age, there stands the ruin of a palace, a skeleton of gray stone clawed at by ivy and time. The wind, its only tenant, moans through shattered archways, carrying whispers of names long turned to dust. Within these desolate halls, where sunlight now cuts through collapsed ceilings to illuminate floors of dirt and decay, there once hung a portrait. It was not of the king, whose iron gaze terrified nations, nor of the queen, whose beauty was a sorrowful ballad. It depicted a young girl, a princess, her face obscured by a delicate painted veil of white silk. Her identity, her story, her fate, all lost to the triumphant chronicles written by her family's destroyers. History does not remember the silenced. It only remembers the screams that followed the silence. This is the story of that silence, of a crown forged in blood, a love poisoned by ambition, and a princess whose legacy was to be forgotten, sealed away from the world behind a veil of lies and eventually a wall of stone. It is a tale etched not in stone monuments, but in the tear stains of a kingdom's last, agonizing breath. King Thuron was not born to the grand throne of Eldoria. He tore it from the hands of a dying dynasty. He was a product of the borderlands, a man carved from the harsh mountains and tempered in the blood of petty wars. His eyes held the cold, flat light of a winter sky, and his ambition was a famine that could never be satisfied. He rose not on promises of prosperity, but on the chilling efficiency of his blade and the loyalty of men who feared him more than they feared death itself. His coronation was a grim affair, held in a hall still bearing the scars of his conquest. He did not wear the ancient, jewel-encrusted crown of his predecessors. Instead, he had a new one forged from the melted-down swords of his vanquished enemies, a stark, black iron circlet that rested on his brow like a brand. His rule began as it would continue, with an assertion of absolute, terrifying power. The whispers of the old nobility were silenced in dungeons, their lands seized, their histories rewritten. King Thuron built his kingdom not on a foundation of stone, but on a bedrock of fear, believing it to be the only material that could never erode. To legitimize his blood-soaked reign, Thuron required a queen of noble, untainted lineage. His prize was Elara of the Southern Isles, a woman whose beauty was as renowned as her family's ancient name. She arrived in a gilded carriage, a stark splash of color and life in Thuron's gray, martial court. She was grace personified, a scholar and a musician, her hands meant for lutes and scrolls, not the cold iron of her new home. The king saw her as the ultimate acquisition, a beautiful broodmare to bear him a true heir and a political symbol to placate the restless southern territories. For Queen Elara, the palace was not a home but a magnificent cage. Her gentle wisdom was dismissed as feminine fragility, her attempts to foster art and culture seen as frivolous distractions from the king's endless preparations for war. She walked the stone corridors like a ghost in fine silks, her smile a carefully constructed mask that hid the profound loneliness of a woman who was a queen in name, but a prisoner in reality. Her heart, once full of hope, began to learn the court's native tongue, the language of silent suffering. In the second year of the queen's gilded captivity, the palace bells rang not for war, but for a birth. Princess Lyra was born, a fragile creature of impossible innocence in a court defined by brutal pragmatism. For the queen, the child was a lifeline, the only source of genuine warmth in the cold fortress she called home. Lyra's laughter, a sound as pure as spring rain, echoed in halls that had only known the clatter of armor and the hushed whispers of conspiracy. Even the king, a man whose heart seemed forged from the same iron as his crown, would momentarily soften in her presence. He saw in her not a daughter to love, but a legacy to be molded, a perfect, unblemished vessel for his dynastic ambitions. The kingdom, starved for a glimmer of hope, embraced the birth of the princess. She was a symbol of peace, a promise of a gentler future. But in the shadowed court of Eldoria, symbols were things to be manipulated, and promises were things to be broken. The innocent princess, celebrated as a beacon of light, was destined to become a pawn in a game played in absolute darkness. The light the princess brought into the world only made the shadows in the palace appear longer and darker. Envy was a poison that seeped through the court. Courtiers who had curried the king's favor now saw the queen's influence, however small, as a threat. Ladies of the court, their own ambitions thwarted, whispered cruelties about the foreign queen and her strange, gentle ways. The most menacing shadow was cast by the king's own brother, Lord Valerius. A man of cunning intellect and veiled resentment, Valerius had stood by Thuron's side during his bloody ascent, believing a share of the power would be his. Instead, he was relegated to the fringes, a trusted advisor whose advice was increasingly ignored. He watched the king dote on his new daughter. He watched the queen's quiet dignity earn a sliver of respect from the people, and his bitterness festered. The palace became a web of intrigue, every smile a potential lie, every corridor a gallery of listening ears. The air grew thick with unspoken plots, and the scent of betrayal began to cling to the heavy velvet draperies like a foul perfume. The birth of an heir did not quell the fire in King Thuron's soul, it stoked it into a raging inferno. With his dynasty seemingly secure, he turned his gaze outward, his hunger for power demanding more. He saw neighboring kingdoms not as peers, but as future conquests, their fields ripe for plunder, their armies obstacles to be crushed. He launched a series of brutal, ill-advised wars, marching his armies across the land under the banner of a glorious, expanding Eldoria. But the campaigns bled the kingdom dry, taxes soared, and fields lay fallow as farmers were conscripted into the infantry. Famine began to stalk the villages, a silent predator born of the king's insatiable pride. His paranoia grew with his empire. He trusted no one, not even his most loyal generals. He saw assassins in every corner and traitors in his own council. His ambition was no longer a tool for building a legacy. It had become a self-consuming madness, a fire that demanded ever more fuel, and he was willing to burn his own kingdom to the ground to keep it alight. The Iron Crown began to feel heavier, not with the weight of responsibility, but with the burden of blood. As the king waged war on the world, Queen Alara fought a silent, desperate battle within the palace walls. She saw the suffering of the people, the hollowed eyes of the women whose husbands and sons never returned from Thuron's glorious campaigns. She would plead with him in the dead of night, her voice a soft counterpoint to his harsh decrees, urging him to show mercy, to consolidate his power through peace rather than fear. He dismissed her words as the naive ramblings of a woman who did not understand the brutal arithmetic of power. Isolated and unheard, her spirit began to wither. She would spend hours in the royal gardens, the only place she felt she could breathe, her tears watering the roses as she mourned the kingdom she had been brought to rule. She wrote letters to her family describing her despair, her fear of her husband, and the darkness she saw pooling in the heart of the court. But the letters were never sent. They were burned one by one, their ashes a testament to her hopelessness, a queen surrounded by 1,000 people, yet utterly and terrifyingly alone. Princess Lyra grew up in a world of beautiful surfaces and horrifying depths. She was raised in opulence, dressed in the finest silks, and taught the graceful arts befitting a royal heir. Yet she lived in an atmosphere of suffocating tension. She learned to read the moods of the court not from words, but from the silence that fell when she entered a room. She learned that her father's affection was a rare and conditional thing, granted only when she was perfectly composed, perfectly obedient. Her only true connection was a secret friendship with a young, stable boy, a stolen hour each day where she could speak of simple things, of horses and the sky, a world away from the political machinations of the court. Her destiny was decided for her before she could even comprehend it. At the age of 10, she was formally betrothed to a cruel, aging prince from a northern empire, a political alliance meant to secure Thuron's latest conquest. To the court and the world she became the princess behind the veil, her identity subsumed by her purpose. She was no longer a child. She was a political asset, her fragile future a bargaining chip in her father's deadly game of thrones. The queen's isolation was a cavernous, aching void. In this profound loneliness, she found a flicker of human kindness in the most unexpected of places. Sir Caelan, the stoic captain of her personal guard. He was a man of few words, but his eyes held a sympathy she had not seen since she left her homeland. He did not seek power or favor. He simply saw her pain. Their connection was not one of scandalous passion, but of shared moments of quiet understanding, a book of poetry exchanged, a shared glance of despair during one of the king's tirades. It was an emotional intimacy, a treason of the heart in a court where such things were more dangerous than a dagger. But Lord Valerius, the king's brother, saw everything. His network of spies missed nothing. He did not expose the bond to the king. That would be too simple. Instead, he twisted it, cultivating a far more poisonous lie. He began to whisper in the darkest corners of the court that the queen's solace was not so innocent. He whispered that Princess Lyra, with her soft features and gentle demeanor so unlike the king's, was not Thuron's true-born daughter. The legitimacy of the succession was now a weapon, primed and ready to be fired. Valerius's lie was the spark that fell upon the dry tinder of the kingdom. The rumor of the princess's illegitimacy spread from the court to the barracks, and from the barracks to the starving streets. For the oppressed lords and the suffering commoners, it was the ultimate betrayal. They had sacrificed their sons and starved for a king whose very bloodline was now in question. It was the justification they needed. Led by the cunning and charismatic Lord Valerius, who presented himself as the kingdom's savior, the rebellion erupted. It was not a battle but an avalanche of fury. The royal army, its morale shattered by endless wars and whispered doubts, collapsed. Entire garrisons defected. The people, driven by hunger and rage, stormed the capital, their pitchforks and torches a tide of vengeance against the stone walls of the palace. The gilded gates were smashed open, and the sanctuary of the royal family became a slaughterhouse. The tapestries were torn down, the finery trampled underfoot, and the sounds of music and courtly grace were replaced by the roar of the mob and the screams of the dying. The Iron Throne was about to be claimed once more, through bloodshed and betrayal. Amid the chaos, the king, his mind fractured by paranoia and the collapse of his world, finally confronted the queen. Valerius's poison had done its work. Thuron no longer saw the woman he married, only the architect of his ruin. He dragged her before the screaming mob in the palace courtyard, his accusations of treason and adultery echoing against the stone. Queen Alara, her face streaked with tears and dirt, denied it all, her pleas for reason lost in the din of hatred. She swore Lyra was his, a truth the king in his madness could no longer accept. He declared her a traitor to the crown and to the kingdom. Her death was not swift. It was a brutal public spectacle. The king turned her over to the mob he had once ruled. They descended upon her like wolves, their pent-up rage at the king's tyranny now directed at this fragile, foreign woman. She was stoned and beaten in the muddy courtyard, her fine gown torn to rags. Her last breath was a choked whisper, her eyes searching the crowd for a final glimpse of her daughter, who was being dragged away by Valerius's guards into the smoke and chaos. With the queen dead and the palace overrun, King Thuron made his last stand in the throne room, the black iron crown still on his head. But his fight was short-lived. He was overwhelmed, disarmed, and brought in chains before his brother. Valerius, now seated on the throne Thuron had built, looked down at him not with triumph but with a cold, surgical disdain. There would be no public execution for Thuron. A martyr's death was too honorable. Instead, Valerius decreed a fate worse than death. The king was stripped of his titles, his name officially struck from all records. He was cast into the deepest, most lightless cell of the palace's own dungeons, a place he himself had designed for his enemies. There, in the crushing, silent dark, he was left to rot. Fed only enough to prolong his agony, he was tormented by the ghosts of his own making, the echo of his queen's screams, the memory of his daughter's terrified face, and the crushing weight of a legacy that had turned to ash. His reign ended not with a bang, but with the slow, pathetic whimpering of a forgotten man starving in the darkness. Princess Lyra was now the most dangerous person in the kingdom. To the few remaining loyalists, she was a symbol of the true bloodline. To Valerius, she was a threat that had to be neutralized. A public execution was too risky. The girl was still beloved by some, an innocent child caught in the storm. So Valerius, with calculated cruelty, announced that the princess, in her grief, would be sent to the remote silent sisterhood abbey to live a life of quiet contemplation, her royal status renounced. It was a compassionate lie. The carriage that took Lyra from the palace did not travel toward any abbey. It wound its way to a derelict watchtower on the kingdom's furthest, most desolate border. There, the young princess was led into a small, windowless chamber. The guards, their faces grim, gave her a single loaf of bread and a pitcher of water. Then they left, and the sound of trowels and wet mortar filled the air. They bricked up the doorway, stone by stone, sealing her inside a tomb of absolute darkness. The princess behind the veil was now entombed behind a wall of stone, her quiet cries for help unheard by anyone, her existence erased from the world forever. The kingdom of Eldoria did not heal under King Valerius. A throne won by betrayal is a throne built on sand. The lords who helped him rise soon plotted against him, and the cycle of violence continued. The land remained scarred by famine and war, the people's hope curdling into a permanent state of cynical despair. The grand palace of King Thuron became a place of fear and sorrow, its corridors haunted by the memory of the tragedy that had unfolded there. The portrait of the veiled princess was taken down and stored in a dusty, forgotten vault, an uncomfortable reminder of the lies that formed the foundation of the new reign. The story of the royal family dissolved into a dark fairy tale, a whispered legend used to frighten children into obedience. The kingdom itself began to crumble, its borders shrinking, its wealth dwindling, until Eldoria was just a name in old atlases, a testament to how swiftly a dynasty built on blood can be washed away by it. The silence that fell over the land was heavier than any stone, a permanent monument to the king, the queen, and the princess history chose to forget. Thus, the tale of the blood-stained crown concludes. The king's insatiable ambition for a lasting legacy earned him nothing but a slow, anonymous death in the dark. The queen, a beacon of grace in a brutal world, found her gentleness repaid with unimaginable cruelty, her name slandered, her life stolen by a furious mob. And the princess, the innocent child who represented the kingdom's only hope for a brighter dawn, was condemned to the most terrible fate of all, to be erased, to vanish from life while still living, entombed in a silent, black eternity. Their story serves as a chilling reminder that power built on fear is a fortress with no foundation. Greed consumes the greedy, betrayal begets betrayal, and the innocent are so often the first to be crushed under the turning wheels of history. The throne, the crown, the palace, they are all gone now, swallowed by time, leaving behind only the faint, sorrowful echo of a promise that was never kept. History bleeds, and its echoes are written in the cries of kings, queens, and lost princesses. This was the Fear Room. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more dark history tales.